I'm sharing my all-time favorite bran muffin recipe with you. This recipe is very special and it has a really neat little story with it. Years ago, I worked with my Aunt Bev and she had a fresh pasta shop and we made all kinds of fresh pasta. We made seafood lasagnas, we made all the different pasta sauces, and we made muffins. And I found this recipe for these bran muffins through a bed and breakfast site online, which I have tried finding since and I can't, so I'm glad I saved the recipe. And you guys, these bran muffins would sell out every single morning without fail before they were even out of the oven. People would pop into the shop, place their order for their muffins, and then come back when we told them that they'd be out of the oven. And to this day, over 30 years later, these are still my favorite bran muffins. They're also a bran muffin recipe that you can keep in the fridge up to 6 weeks, so you can make as few or as many as you want, and they freeze really, really well. So let me show you how to make these amazing, the best ever bran muffins. This recipe comes from my treasured recipe book where I put all of my all-time favorite recipes. And it is a simple recipe to make, and I'm going to take you step by step. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use 2 cups of raisins, and what I always do is I will add boiling water to my raisins, even when I'm making butter tarts, anything that raisins, except for cookies, anything that raisins is in a recipe, I will plump them up with the hot water. So I'll just let them sit in the hot water. You need 2 cups of water. Right here, I'm just putting in just over a cup, and I'll top it up to 2 cups as I go along. In a large bowl, I'm going to start adding my dry ingredients, starting with my flour. I'm just using regular all-purpose flour, and I'm going to put 5 cups of flour in the bowl. This is a big batch of muffins. You can half the recipe, but I always make the full recipe because the extra batter can stay in the fridge for up to 6 weeks. And then you just scoop out what you need when you're making fresh muffins, or you can bake them all at once and they freeze really, really well. So here I'm adding my baking soda, 5 teaspoons of baking soda. This is an old-fashioned recipe that doesn't call for baking powder, but near the end, I'm going to tell you a tip about changing some of that baking soda over to baking powder and the difference that you're going to get with the muffins. Now I've added my salt. There's 1 tablespoon of salt, and I'm just going to mix that all together. Now it's time to add the wheat bran. Now the bran flakes are added in 2 separate parts of making these muffins. Here I'm adding 4 cups of my bran flakes into my flour, baking soda, and salt mixture. And that's it for the dry ingredients. So I'm just going to whisk the flour, baking soda, and salt mixture really well with the bran flakes. I've added an extra half a cup of water to my raisins for a total of 2 cups of water, and now I'm adding 2 cups of my bran flakes to my raisin water mixture. And I'm thoroughly going to combine the bran with the raisins and water and get that bran thoroughly wet. And to this mixture, I like to add a little bit of vanilla. That is completely optional, but I love vanilla in most all of my baking. So I'm going to add 3 teaspoons of vanilla. Another item I love to add to these bran muffins are dates. Now, this recipe calls for 2 cups of raisins, so you could substitute that for just dates, but I like to add about 1.5 cups of chopped dates, as well as the 2 cups of raisins that I'm using. So I'm just going to cut those up with my scissors, and then, or you can use a knife, but this is what I always do. I find it's easier. And then I keep some whole dates aside, as you'll see later, that I like to put on top of the muffins just before they go into the oven. This recipe is also superb with chopped walnuts. That is so nice in these bran muffins. So it's completely versatile. You could omit the raisins, you can omit the raisins and the dates, you can just put walnuts in. So do whatever you and your family prefer. But for me, when I make these muffins, I always put in my 2 cups of raisins. I always put in about 1.5 cups of chopped dates, and then I put a whole date on top of the muffins. And sometimes I'll put in the walnuts because that is really nice as well. Stir that really, really well. Now it's time to cream the butter and the sugar together. So I'm taking 1 1/4 cup of softened butter. To the butter, I am adding 3 cups of white granulated sugar, and then I'm going to put my mixer on and cream the butter and sugar really, really well. Once the butter and flour are thoroughly combined, it's time to add the eggs. This recipe takes 4 eggs in total, and I like to crack each egg one at a time in a little dish just to make sure there's no extra little shells that may break. And I did have a little shell in the next 2 eggs that I had to scoop out. So this is a really good way to safeguard getting any little bits of eggshell in your baking. These are not farm fresh eggs, and I miss my farm fresh eggs. We need to get some more, and I do find that the shells from the eggs you get at the grocery store are so thin. But that's what I have, so that's what I'm using. So once my eggs are thoroughly combined, it's time to add buttermilk. Buttermilk is key to this recipe, my friends. I would not suggest substituting it with anything. The buttermilk is what keeps these bran muffins so incredibly moist. So I'm adding a full liter of my buttermilk to my creamed butter, sugar, and egg mixture. Once the buttermilk is thoroughly combined with the butter and the sugar and eggs, I'm going to add my raisins, my dates, and my wet bran with the water. And soaking that bran also makes a huge difference to these muffins, so don't skip this part. Even if you don't put raisins in your bran muffins, soak that 2 cups of bran flakes in with your 2 cups of um, hot water. It really does make a big difference. Little tips and tricks of the trade. But we made so many of these muffins at my aunt's pasta shop. Trust me, we learned the tricks. Now, some of you may have other tricks or different things that you do when you're making these muffins, but I'll tell you, these have been no fail for us. Now the last step is combining the wet ingredients with the dry ingredients. Now this is a really important step. You don't want to overmix your muffins. You just want to make sure that you've got the wet and the dry ingredients combined, but you want to stir it as little as possible. And once you have all your ingredients combined, you're never going to stir it again. Even once you put the extra batter in the fridge, you never have to stir this again. You're just going to scoop out your batter as much as you need for as many muffins as you want, and that's it. So this is the only stirring that I'm going to do. Today I've decided I'm going to make 24 muffins, and I'm going to keep a few out for my husband's lunches and for me to have with a cup of tea or for a little light breakfast. And then I'm going to freeze the remaining muffins that I bake, and then I'm going to put the remaining batter in the fridge. And then all I have to do is just scoop and bake as needed. And then these muffins are going to go into a 400-degree oven for 20 minutes. Now, everybody's oven is different, so you might want to check after 15 minutes. Just put a skewer or a toothpick in the center of one of your muffins to make sure no batter comes when you pull that pick out of your muffin. And if you only want to make 6 muffins, put a little bit of water in the empty 6 muffin cups of the tray, and that helps make your muffins bake evenly. So I am going to add a whole date to the top of my muffins. I just love how these look and how these turn out. It just seems really extra decadent to have this big, beautiful date on my Bran muffins. While those Bran muffins are baking and making my house smell incredible, I'm just scooping out the last of my batter into a container that I'm going to store in the fridge. My muffins are ready, and you'll notice when they come out of the oven that they don't have the big bakery style domes on top. And that's totally normal for this recipe, and here's why. This is an old-fashioned recipe, and it was originally designed with baking soda only. And the soda reacts right away with the buttermilk and the hot bran mixture as soon as you stir the batter. So by the time the muffins hit the oven, most of that bubbling action is already finished, and that's why the tops bake up flatter. It's just the nature of this old style recipe. But if you do prefer domed muffins, you can easily tweak this recipe. Instead of using all 5 teaspoons of baking soda, just replace 1 to 2 teaspoons of the soda with baking powder. Baking powder is double acting, so it's going to react once it's mixed and again with the heat in the oven. That second rise helps push that batter up into that nice rounded dome. So another trick is baking your muffins at 425 for the first 5 minutes and then reduce the oven to 375 to finish baking. That burst of higher heat gives the batter an extra lift before the top set. But this is how we've always made them, and we love them just the way they are. These are really the best Bran muffins that I've ever eaten. These muffins cooked up perfectly, golden brown on the outside, soft and tender on the inside, and they have that perfect moist crumb. And as you can see when I break one open, oh my goodness, the raisins and dates tucked inside, giving little bursts of sweetness in every bite. So the texture is hearty, but it's still light, and these never turn out heavy. And oh my gosh, the smell right now, you guys, is incredible. I have let these cool a little bit, and they're really a perfect texture, and I know how they're going to taste because they're the only Bran muffins I ever make. They are so moist. They are not dry at all. And even when I take these out of the freezer and have them after they've thawed, they are not dry. And I'll just warm them up in the microwave for maybe 10 seconds or so, or I don't warm them up at all. They're great just as they are. That bit with the big date on the top, that's the best part. But with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, or to take with you when you're going to work, or just to have for a little afternoon snack, you cannot go wrong with these muffins. I hope you give these muffins a try. They are so delicious. I was really excited to share this recipe with you so that you can have them at home too. So if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and the little bell next to it so you're notified every time I upload a new video. Take care, and remember, life is short, so make the most of that dash in between. I'll see you next time. Hey friend, if you enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you'd like, comment, and subscribe. Here on Simply Serene, you'll always find recipes, creative inspiration, and the simple joys of peaceful, simple living.